The glass tipped beneath the crystal chandeliers, and cold coke poured across Evelyn Carter's torn coat in front of more than 100 surgeons, donors, and executives. Lauren Pierce lowered the empty glass with a smile. "Now you look exactly like someone who doesn't belong here." No one moved. A few guests stared. Others lowered their eyes to their plates. Not one person was willing to challenge the woman who controlled access to one of Boston's most powerful medical foundations. Evelyn stood in the spreading puddle, mud on her shoes and soda dripping from her sleeves. She did not shout. She did not cry. She only opened her worn canvas bag and carefully protected an old leather notebook inside. Then a small silver pin slipped loose. It struck the marble, spun beneath the golden light, and rolled across the lobby. Evelyn watched it quietly. Lauren never looked down. That was her second mistake, because the billionaire entering through the glass doors recognized that tiny symbol, and the moment he saw the woman standing behind it, his face went pale. Lauren thought she had humiliated a nameless woman in rags. Before the night was over, she would learn that the woman she tried to throw into the rain held a truth powerful enough to shake the entire foundation. The sound wasn't loud, not at first. It was only the faint clink of ice striking the inside of a glass as condensation slipped onto polished fingers. Then the glass tilted. Brown liquid poured in a slow, deliberate stream across the front of Evelyn Carter's coat, soaking through worn fabric that already carried the stains of a long day. Cold coke splashed over her scarf, ran down the front of her sweater, and dripped onto the gleaming marble floor beneath the towering crystal chandeliers of Boston's Ashford Medical Foundation. For one impossible second, nobody moved. The ballroom held more than 100 people. Hospital presidents stood beside pharmaceutical executives. Surgeons in tailored tuxedos balanced crystal wine glasses, while donors wearing diamonds the size of marbles paused in mid-conversation. A string quartet near the stage stopped playing one note before the end of a movement. Only the slow drip, drip, drip of soda breaking against polished stone disturbed the silence. Lauren Pierce lowered the empty glass with a satisfied smile. "I'm afraid," she said, smoothing the sleeve of her designer jacket. "You're making quite a scene." Her voice carried easily through the room. "So I'm asking you one final time to leave before security escorts you out." No one questioned what they had just witnessed. No one asked why an elegantly dressed executive had emptied a drink onto a 61-year-old woman who had done nothing more than stand quietly inside the entrance hall. They simply watched. Evelyn looked down for only a moment. The dark stain spread slowly across her patched brown coat. The fabric had already been damp from freezing rain earlier that afternoon. Now the sugary liquid soaked deeper, carrying bits of melting ice toward the worn cuffs she had stitched herself years ago. She brushed neither the coke nor the ice away. Instead, she bent slightly, not toward the puddle around her shoes, but toward the weathered canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. Inside rested an old leather notebook wrapped in wax paper. She opened the bag just enough to check that the notebook remained dry. Only after seeing it safely protected did she straighten again. The people closest to her noticed that detail. It wasn't the ruined coat she cared about. It wasn't her own embarrassment. It was whatever rested inside that faded bag. Lauren noticed it too. She laughed softly. "Protecting your belongings?" she asked. "That's wise. Security has a lost and found if anything gets left behind." A few uneasy chuckles floated from nearby tables. Not many. Most guests avoided looking directly at Evelyn now. Looking meant acknowledge what had happened. Ignoring it required much less courage. The grand ballroom glowed with warm amber light reflected from brass columns and polished glass walls. Giant digital screens displayed elegant animations celebrating the Ashford Medical Foundation's 20th anniversary. A banner stretched across the stage. 20 years of transforming modern medicine. Servers moved cautiously between tables carrying silver trays topped with champagne flutes. None of them dared stop. Near the entrance stood security officer David Mills, 42 years old, broad shoulders, professional posture. Years of training had taught him to read situations quickly. Nothing about the woman before him suggested danger. She stood perfectly still, hands relaxed, voice calm, eyes clear. Yet Lauren pointed toward Evelyn as though identifying a criminal. "This woman refuses to leave," Lauren announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Please escort her outside." David hesitated, only briefly. His job required him to follow directions from senior management. Still, something felt wrong. He looked at Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "if you'll come with me, we can sort this out somewhere quieter." Evelyn turned toward him. Her face showed neither anger nor fear, only fatigue. The kind earned through many years of carrying disappointments without allowing them to harden the heart. "I'll leave," she replied gently, "once someone verifies my invitation." Lauren folded her arms. "There is no invitation." "There is. You forged someone else's name." "I didn't." Lauren smiled again, a colder smile this time. "The guest list has already been checked." It hadn't. Courtney, the young receptionist beside the welcome desk, knew it hadn't. Lauren had refused to open the electronic registry. She had made her decision the instant Evelyn stepped through the revolving doors wearing mud-streaked boots and a torn coat. Courtney lowered her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the tablet in her hands. She wanted to speak. She didn't. Around the ballroom, conversations resumed in whispers. "Who is she? Must have wandered in. Poor thing. They should have handled this before guests arrived." No one asked whether Lauren had been right, only whether the interruption would delay dinner. Evelyn heard every word. She had heard variations of those whispers before. Hospitals, universities, corporate meetings, airports, country clubs. People often believed quiet ears belonged to invisible people. They were almost always wrong. Lauren stepped closer. Expensive perfume drifted through the air. "I've asked politely." Her voice lost its polished warmth. "Now I'm telling you. You don't belong here." Evelyn met her eyes. She did not answer immediately. The silence unsettled Lauren more than any argument might have. Finally, Evelyn spoke. Very softly. "Are you certain you want to do this in front of everyone?" Several nearby guests looked up. The question wasn't emotional. It wasn't threatening. It sounded final. Lauren laughed. "I'm absolutely certain." She turned toward David. "Please remove her." David stepped forward again. "Evelyn." He caught himself. He didn't actually know her name. "Ma'am." Before he could finish, Evelyn carefully reached inside her coat. Half the room stiffened. Lauren instinctively stepped backward. David's hand moved toward his radio. Instead of a weapon, Evelyn withdrew a folded invitation. Cream-colored cardstock, edges softened from being carried all day. She held it out. Lauren never looked. "I told you already," Lauren snapped. "I'm done playing games." With one quick movement, she slapped the invitation from Evelyn's hand. It floated downward, landing beside the spreading puddle of Coke. No one bent to retrieve it. For the first time, a flicker of sadness crossed Evelyn's face, not because of the invitation, because of the people watching. She slowly surveyed the ballroom. Doctors, researchers, executives, philanthropists, people who publicly celebrated compassion, people who funded campaigns about dignity, people who applauded speeches about equality. Tonight, none of them moved. One man adjusted his cufflinks. A woman reached for another sip of wine. Someone quietly silenced a ringing phone. The room had decided that comfort mattered more than conscience. Lauren sensed victory. "You've embarrassed yourself enough." She pointed toward the entrance. "Go." Evelyn bent to retrieve the invitation herself. As she lifted her canvas bag, the worn strap slipped from her shoulder. The bag struck her leg. Its flap opened. An old leather notebook shifted toward the opening. Instinctively, she caught it before it fell. But something else escaped. A tiny silver object bounced once against the marble, then again, then spun in widening circles across the polished floor. Its delicate metal caught the chandelier light. Round and simple. Two intersecting silver lines enclosed within a narrow circle, no larger than a quarter. It continued spinning. Slower. Slower. Until it finally settled several feet away. Nobody recognized it. Nobody except the man who had just entered through the ballroom doors. Nathan Cole paused mid-step. His executive assistant nearly walked into him. Nathan's eyes never left the silver pin resting on the marble. The color drained from his face. For 17 years, he had not seen that symbol. Not since the darkest months of his life. The noise of the ballroom seemed to disappear. Lauren continued speaking. David shifted uncertainly. Guests whispered, but Nathan heard none of it. His entire world narrowed to that tiny silver emblem beside the puddle of coke. He whispered only one word. Impossible. And then, without another glance at the stage prepared to honor him, the billionaire changed direction and began walking toward the woman everyone else had decided did not belong. But hours earlier, before crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble, before expensive shoes circled a puddle of spilled coke without stepping into it, before silence became its own kind of accusation, another Boston had been waking beneath a gray winter sky. The rain had started before dawn. Not a heavy storm, just the steady, icy drizzle that settled into every crack of the city, turning sidewalks slick and old brick buildings darker by the minute. In Roxbury, the parking lot behind the Harbor Street Community Kitchen shimmered beneath yellow security lights. Delivery vans rolled through puddles while volunteers hurried between loading doors carrying boxes of canned vegetables, blankets, bottled water, and medical supplies. Evelyn Carter arrived before sunrise. She parked nothing because she owned no car anymore. Instead, she climbed off the number 23 bus carrying a faded canvas bag over one shoulder and a large thermos balanced carefully in one hand. The security guard at the rear entrance smiled the moment he saw her. "Morning, Miss Evelyn," she smiled back. "Morning, Frank." Frank Willis was 69 and had worked overnight security there for nearly 12 years. "You know," he said while unlocking the service entrance, "one of these Saturdays you're going to sleep in." Evelyn laughed softly. "I'll try that after I retire." Frank shook his head. "You've been saying that for 10 years. She disappeared into the warmth of the kitchen before he could continue. The building smelled exactly the way it always did on Saturdays. Fresh coffee, chicken broth, soap, wet cardboard, and bread just beginning to toast. Grace Holloway, the kitchen director, stood over an industrial stove stirring a pot large enough to feed 100 people. She looked up. There she is. Grace was 58, broad-shouldered, practical, and incapable of watching someone work harder than herself. "You missed breakfast again, didn't you?" "I had coffee." "Coffee isn't breakfast. It pretends pretty well." Grace rolled her eyes. "I made oatmeal." "I'll eat later." "You always say later." Evelyn hung her coat beside the pantry door. It wasn't much of a coat anymore. The elbows had been patched twice. The left sleeve had faded differently than the right after years of careful washing. Still, it kept out enough cold. That morning, it would not stay dry for long. The kitchen filled quickly. Most of the people arriving weren't homeless. They were adults displaced after an apartment fire 3 blocks away the previous evening. Some still wore borrowed clothing. Others carried clear plastic bags containing everything they had managed to save. Evelyn moved naturally among them. She never asked intrusive questions, never offered pity, only practical help. Coffee? There's room near the heater. Take another blanket. The nurse will be here in half an hour. She remembered names. That mattered. People who had lost homes often feared becoming invisible before anything else. Near one of the folding tables sat Martha Lewis, 72 years old, retired librarian. Her apartment had filled with smoke the night before. She still wore the slippers she had escaped in. Even indoors, she couldn't stop shivering. Evelyn noticed before anyone else. Without hesitation, she removed her own dry coat. "No, honey," Martha protested immediately. "You'll freeze. I move around. You'll be cold. I'll survive." She gently draped the coat over Martha's shoulders anyway. The older woman reached for Evelyn's hand. "You always give away something you need." Evelyn smiled. "I've learned things usually come back." Across the room, a loud crash interrupted the conversation. A stack of supply crates shifted near the loading dock. Calvin Price stumbled backward with a sharp gasp. 39 years old and working his second delivery route of the morning, Calvin had slipped on rainwater tracked across the concrete floor. One heavy carton struck his shoulder before crashing beside him. Several volunteers rushed over. "I'm okay," Calvin insisted, though he clearly wasn't. He tried standing. His knee buckled immediately. Evelyn reached him first. "Easy. I've got another delivery. It can wait." "It can't." It just did. She guided him toward a chair, while Grace grabbed an ice pack from the freezer. Calvin looked embarrassed. "I'm slowing everybody down." Evelyn handed him a bottle of water. "No," she smiled. "Gravity did that." Even Calvin laughed. The tension eased. By 9 o'clock, nearly every chair inside the dining hall had filled. Outside, freezing rain became sleet. The old building groaned under the weather. Volunteers continued carrying supplies through the rear entrance, while local churches delivered more blankets than anyone had expected. Evelyn spent nearly an hour organizing medications donated by nearby clinics. Blood pressure medicine, insulin, inhalers, antibiotics. She arranged everything alphabetically, with practiced precision. Grace watched from across the room. "You've got hospital handwriting." Evelyn looked up only briefly. "I've been told." "You ever think about going back?" Evelyn paused, only for a heartbeat. "Some doors close," Grace answered quietly. "Not always." Before Evelyn could respond, a loud crack echoed through the building. Then another. Someone shouted from the storage room. "Water!" Volunteers rushed toward the back hallway. A frozen pipe had burst overhead. Freezing water sprayed across shelves stacked with donated blankets and first aid supplies. Boxes collapsed almost instantly. People scrambled to move whatever they could before everything soaked through. Evelyn grabbed the nearest shelf. "Move the medications first!" 3 volunteers followed immediately. Water poured down harder. Within seconds, her sweater clung to her shoulders. Mud from workers' boots mixed with dirty water across the floor. Someone slipped. Another volunteer nearly fell carrying oxygen equipment. Evelyn caught the edge before the tanks crashed. "Watch your footing." The next 20 minutes disappeared into organized chaos. Blankets, medical kits, wheelchairs, emergency food. Everything had to be moved before the room flooded completely. By the time city maintenance crews shut off the water, everyone inside looked exhausted. Evelyn looked worse than anyone. Her trousers were soaked from the knees down. Brown streaks of mud covered her boots. The sleeve of her sweater had torn while lifting shelving. Blue paint left over from repairing storage cabinets weeks earlier, now mixed with rust-colored stains across the fabric. Grace finally forced her toward a chair. "Sit." "I'm fine." "No. I'm really..." "Sit." Evelyn obeyed. Grace disappeared into the office. When she returned, she carried an envelope. "Cab fare." Evelyn immediately shook her head. "You need to go home." "I can take the bus. You've been soaked for an hour. I'll dry. Take it. No. Grace sighed. You are the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I've heard that before. Grace slipped the envelope back into her pocket. Then at least eat. This time Evelyn accepted. She finished half a bowl of soup while helping Calvin complete insurance paperwork for his employer. He looked at her with genuine gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. You already did. I didn't. You laughed. He looked confused. She smiled. The world needs more of that. Just after 1 o'clock, her phone vibrated. A calendar reminder appeared across the screen. Ashford Medical Foundation 20-year research anniversary reception, 5 o'clock p.m., hosted by Dr. Thomas Reed. Grace noticed immediately. What's that? An event. You going dressed like this? Evelyn looked down. Mud, water stains, torn sleeve. Her coat still rested around Martha's shoulders across the room. She hadn't even thought about herself. I suppose I should change. What time is it? She checked. Her smile faded slightly. Traffic after the storm would be impossible. Going home first meant arriving late. Very late. She thought quietly for several seconds, then stood. I'll make it. In those clothes? I don't have another choice. Grace frowned. People judge. I know. You don't owe anyone an explanation. I know. She collected her canvas bag, carefully checked that the old leather notebook remained wrapped safely inside, then slid a sealed envelope beneath it. Finally, almost absent-mindedly, her fingers brushed a small silver pin fastened near the inside pocket. She smiled faintly. A memory passed across her face before disappearing just as quickly. Grace noticed. What is that? An old reminder. Of what? That truth usually takes longer than lies. Neither woman spoke again for several moments. Outside, buses hissed through wet streets. Boston moved forward, unaware that before sunset one soaked coat, one forgotten silver pin, and one quiet woman would expose a truth buried for 20 years. Evelyn stepped onto the city bus. Passengers barely looked at her. To them she appeared exactly what she looked like, an older woman returning home after a difficult day of volunteer work. No one imagined she was traveling toward the most important room in the city, or that before the evening ended, that room would never be the same again. The bus pulled away from Roxbury with a low mechanical groan, tires hissing through rainwater gathered along the curb. Evelyn sat near the middle, one hand resting on the canvas bag in her lap. The heater beneath the seat gave off more noise than warmth. Wet coats filled the aisle with the smell of wool, rain, and cold city air. A construction worker slept with his chin against his chest. A hospital aide in navy scrubs stared through the fogged window. Two older women whispered near the rear while the windshield wipers swept back and forth in a steady rhythm. Evelyn watched Boston pass in pieces. Brick storefronts, traffic lights glowing red through drizzle, a church basement where volunteers stacked folding chairs, a pharmacy with a handwritten sign promising free blood pressure checks. Then taller buildings began rising beyond the neighborhoods, their glass walls disappearing into gray clouds. She opened her bag. The old notebook lay inside, wrapped in wax paper and tied with a narrow cord. Its leather cover had once been deep brown. Time had softened it almost black around the edges. The initials EC were pressed into one corner, faint but still visible beneath scratches and years of handling. Evelyn touched them with her thumb. For a moment, the sounds of the bus faded. She was no longer 61, she was 41 again, standing beneath harsh fluorescent lights in a university research laboratory while rain rattled the windows of another Boston winter. The room had smelled of antiseptic, coffee, and overheated equipment. Thomas Reed had been younger then. So had she. They had spent 14 months watching one promising treatment fail for reasons no one could explain. The therapy worked in theory, but patients developed dangerous complications hours after receiving it. Senior researchers blamed the formula. Administrators blamed the trial design. Investors began preparing to withdraw. Evelyn blamed neither. she stayed. Night after night, she compared blood samples, temperature shifts, clotting times, and enzyme reactions until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started forming a pattern. The problem wasn't the treatment itself. It was the rate at which it entered the body. A small change in timing, combined with a stabilizing step no one else had considered, turned a failing protocol into something safe enough to save lives. She had written the first version by hand. Blue ink, 37 pages. At the top of the final page, she drew a simple mark to separate the original work from later revisions. 2 intersecting lines inside a circle. Thomas later had silver pins made for the adult members of the team. There had been 7 pins. Only 1 remained with Evelyn. The bus stopped suddenly. Brakes squealed. Evelyn returned to the present. A man in the aisle caught himself against a metal pole and muttered an apology to no one in particular. The doors opened. Cold air rushed in. Evelyn adjusted the wax paper around the notebook and noticed the invitation beside it. Cream-colored paper, raised lettering, Ashford Medical Foundation. 20 years of transforming modern medicine. The words looked elegant, almost noble. She unfolded the card. Dr. Thomas Reed requests the honor of your presence. Beneath that appeared a short description of the evening. A celebration of the Carter-Reed blood stabilization protocol and the institutional vision that brought it to the world. Evelyn read the sentence twice. Institutional vision. She nearly smiled. The institution had possessed no vision when she first presented the protocol. It had possessed fear. Fear of losing funding. Fear of admitting that the most important breakthrough had come from a black woman without family connections, inherited wealth, or a famous last name. Fear that crediting her honestly might weaken the authority of men who had already promised investors the discovery belonged to them. She remembered the first closed-door meeting. 3 executives, 2 university attorneys. One offer disguised as gratitude. They asked her to sign an authorship agreement naming Senior Director Charles Ashford as principal architect of the protocol. Her name would appear fourth, beneath 2 administrators who had never entered the laboratory after sunset. In exchange, she would receive a promotion, a larger office, a generous bonus, and, as one attorney had put it, a secure place in the future of the program. Evelyn had placed the document back on the table. No. The room went still. Charles Ashford leaned forward. You should think carefully. I have. Everyone compromises. Not with the truth. That sentence cost her almost everything. First came the meetings, then the warnings, then the accusation that she was difficult, uncooperative, emotionally unstable under pressure. Her research access was restricted. Her laboratory team was reassigned. Within 6 months, the university declined to renew her position. The official letter praised her past contribution and cited organizational restructuring. No one mentioned the unsigned agreement. No one had to. Evelyn folded the invitation and slid it back into the bag. Beside the notebook rested the sealed envelope. Heavy cream paper, certified legal markings along one edge. She pressed it gently against her palm. 20 years ago, she had possessed truth without power. Tonight, she carried both. But power had arrived late, too late to protect the life she had built with Samuel. Her late husband had been the first person she called after losing the laboratory. He had listened without interrupting. Then he drove across town, brought her home and cooked dinner even though he was terrible at it. The chicken burned, the rice stuck to the pot. Evelyn had laughed until she cried. Samuel had taken her hands across the kitchen table. They can remove your name from a paper, he said, but they cannot remove what you did from the world. For years he repeated that whenever another article appeared without her name, whenever another executive accepted an award, whenever the foundation used diagrams copied from her notebook. Samuel had been a public school counselor for 36 years. He believed patience could mend almost anything, but patience did not pay legal bills. Evelyn spent her savings trying to challenge the authorship records. Then the mortgage fell behind. Then Samuel became ill. He died at 64 after a long decline that emptied the house of laughter before it emptied the bank account. Evelyn sold the home 18 months later. She packed their marriage into labeled boxes: kitchen, books, Samuel-esque clothes. Research. The silver pin stayed in her coat pocket the entire day. She moved into a small apartment in Roxbury and stopped answering requests for interviews. Not that many came. The world had already accepted the cleaner version of the story. A great institution had produced a miracle. The people inside it had become details. Evelyn turned toward the window. Rain traced thin paths down the glass. She could see her reflection faintly. Gray at her temples, tired eyes, a torn sweater, mud drying on her trousers. No one looking at her now would imagine that medical journals had once cited calculations written in her hand. That hospital systems across the country still used procedures built from her work. That she had walked away from a career rather than sign a lie. But she had not walked away from medicine. Not really. She helped uninsured adults appeal denied claims. She filled out medication assistance forms at community centers. She sat beside frightened patients in hospital waiting rooms when their families lived too far away to come. She translated complicated discharge instructions into plain language. She asked for nothing. Sometimes people tried to pay her. She always refused. Samuel had once told her that knowledge became selfish when it stopped at the person who possessed it. So she kept giving hers away. The bus turned onto a wider avenue. Downtown Boston appeared ahead through the rain. Glass towers, hotel canopies, black sedans lined near the curb. Evelyn checked the time. 4:36. The reception began at 5. Her phone vibrated. A message from Thomas Reed. I am delayed at Massachusetts General. Emergency consultation. Please go inside without me. Your name is on the guest list. I will arrive as soon as I can. Evelyn read it slowly, then once more. A small uneasiness moved through her. Thomas had insisted she come. He said the evening would finally correct the record. He said the foundation board was ready to acknowledge the truth. He said Nathan Cole's investment would change everything. Evelyn had not believed all of it. But she believed Thomas. He had been the only senior researcher who refused to sign the false authorship statement. That choice had cost him promotion, influence, and years of quiet punishment. He carried guilt for surviving inside the institution after she had been pushed out. Tonight, he hoped to repair what he could. The bus stopped 2 blocks from the foundation. Evelyn rose carefully. The canvas bag felt heavier now. The sealed envelope pressed against the notebook. The pin remained fastened inside the pocket. As she stepped down onto the wet sidewalk, a gust of wind caught her torn sleeve and pushed rain beneath the fabric. Across the avenue, the Ashford Medical Foundation glowed through the storm. 40 feet of glass, brass doors, a marble entrance lit in warm gold. Valets moved beneath black umbrellas while guests stepped from luxury cars without touching the rain. Evelyn stood beneath the bus shelter and watched for a moment. On a giant screen visible through the lobby windows, a medical diagram rotated slowly above elegant lettering. She recognized every line, every notation, every correction. It had been copied from page 19 of her notebook. Her name was nowhere on the display. Evelyn tightened her grip on the bag. She could have turned around, gone home, allowed the foundation to celebrate its polished version of history. Instead, she stepped into the rain. 1 block, then another. Mud gathered at the edges of her shoes. Cold water darkened her sweater. The sealed envelope remained dry beneath her arm. By the time she reached the brass doors, she looked like someone the people inside had trained themselves not to see. Evelyn placed one hand on the handle. Behind the glass waited wealth, authority, and 20 years of stolen recognition. Inside her bag waited the truth. She pulled the door open, and before anyone asked her name, someone had already decided she did not belong. Warm air rushed over Evelyn's face. The contrast was almost painful. Outside, winter rain swept along the avenue in silver sheets. Inside, the Ashford Medical Foundation glowed with polished brass, pale marble, and carefully placed pools of golden light. A wall of glass rose 3 stories above the lobby, reflecting chandeliers that seemed to float in the dark like frozen constellations. Evelyn stepped onto a thick gray carpet designed to catch water from expensive shoes. Her own shoes left faint brown marks anyway. A revolving door turned behind her as 2 men in black overcoats entered laughing. An attendant hurried to take their umbrellas. No one offered to take Evelyn's bag. She did not expect them to. At the center of the lobby, a registration station curved beneath a suspended sign bearing the foundation's silver crest. 4 attendants stood behind tablets and trays of printed name cards. Lauren Pierce stood among them. She was 39, tall, composed, and dressed in a fitted ivory jacket that appeared almost luminous beneath the chandelier light. Her blonde hair was pinned smoothly at the back of her head. A pearl brooch rested at her collar. Every detail suggested control. She noticed Evelyn before Evelyn reached the desk. Her eyes moved once from the torn sleeve to the canvas bag, from the canvas bag to the mud drying on Evelyn's trousers. The judgment arrived before the greeting. Lauren stepped out from behind the desk and blocked the path into the ballroom. "Ma'am," she said, lowering her voice into the tone people used when pretending kindness made humiliation more acceptable. "The evening warming center is on Tremont Street." Evelyn stopped. "I'm not looking for the warming center." Lauren gave a small, patient smile. "There's also a church shelter 2 blocks east. They serve dinner until 7. I'm here for the reception." The smile remained. The warmth vanished. Lauren glanced toward the attendants as though expecting one of them to share her disbelief. "This is a private foundation event." "I know. Invitation only." "Yes." The nearest attendant, a young woman named Courtney Hall, looked up from her tablet. Courtney was 26 and had worked at the foundation for less than 3 months. She had already learned when Lauren expected silence. Evelyn reached into her coat and removed the folded invitation. Rain had softened one edge, but the raised lettering remained visible. Lauren did not take it. "Where did you get that?" "It was mailed to me." "By whom?" "Dr. Thomas Reed." Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly. Behind her, another guest approached the desk, a man in a navy tuxedo. Lauren turned immediately. "Dr. Henderson," she said with bright recognition. "Welcome. Your card is ready." She stepped aside, smiled warmly, and handed him a printed badge with both hands. Dr. Henderson nodded at Evelyn only because she stood in his way. Lauren guided him around her. The change in manner was so complete, it might have been performed by 2 different women. When he had gone, Lauren faced Evelyn again. "Dr. Reed's name appears on many public foundation announcements. He invited me personally. Do you have identification?" Evelyn opened a small wallet and held out her Massachusetts state ID. Lauren accepted that. She examined it longer than necessary. "Evelyn Carter," she read. "Yes." Lauren looked at the photograph, then at Evelyn, then back at the photograph. "This proves your name. It does not prove you belong at this event." "The invitation should do that." Lauren ignored the card still held between Evelyn's fingers. Courtney's tablet glowed a few feet away. The guest list waited behind a single search bar. Evelyn nodded toward it. "You can check." Lauren's expression hardened. "We've had people obtain names from public donor lists before. I am not one of them. Some arrive with printed invitations. This was mailed. Some claim to know physicians. I do know him." Lauren handed the ID back. "People say many things when they want access to wealthy guests." Evelyn slowly put the card into her pocket. The words did not surprise her. What surprised her was the ease with which Lauren said them. Not loudly, not angrily, as though suspicion was simply policy. Across the lobby, black cars continued pulling beneath the glass canopy. Guests passed through the entrance in waves of perfume, wool, diamonds, and polished shoes. Names were recognized before identification appeared. Hands were shaken. Coats disappeared into the cloakroom. No one else was asked to explain why they were there. Evelyn watched an older man in a wrinkled rain jacket enter with an umbrella dripping across the floor. Lauren smiled at him from across the room. "Senator Wallace, good evening." His clothing was less formal than Evelyn's, but nobody called it rags. Nobody directed him toward a shelter. Evelyn turned back. "Please search my name." Lauren crossed her arms. "I've already explained the situation." "You explained your assumption." A brief silence formed between them. Courtney's fingers hovered over the tablet. Lauren noticed. "Courtney," she said without turning. "Assist the next guest." Courtney swallowed. "Yes, Miss Pierce." She looked away. Evelyn felt the familiar ache settle beneath her ribs. It was never only the person doing the harm. Sometimes the deeper wound came from those who recognized it and lowered their eyes. Music drifted from the ballroom beyond the brass-framed doors. A low string arrangement, elegant and restrained. Laughter rose in soft bursts. Cutlery touched china. On a wide digital screen mounted above the entrance, an animation began. Red cells moved through a transparent vessel. A stabilizing sequence appeared in pale blue. 3 timed intervals flashed beneath it. Evelyn stared. She knew the diagram before the accompanying title appeared. It had been drawn from page 19 of her notebook. Not inspired by it, copied from it. Even the angle of the second infusion line matched the small correction she had made by hand at 2:17 one morning after noticing a delayed clotting response. The screen faded to a photograph of Charles Ashford standing beside a laboratory table. Words appeared beneath him. Visionary leadership that changed modern medicine. Evelyn's hand tightened around the strap of her bag. 20 years disappeared. She could smell burnt coffee again, hear the hum of the old centrifuge, feel Samuel's coat around her shoulders after he picked her up outside the university on the day she lost her position. The truth had survived, but her name had not. Lauren followed her gaze. "Yes," she said, "tonight is extremely important to the Foundation. We cannot allow disruptions." Evelyn turned slowly. "Disruptions? We have major donors arriving." "And that screen?" Lauren glanced upward. "What about it? Do you know who created that protocol?" "Dr. Ashford's team." "Which member?" Lauren gave a dismissive laugh. "I'm not a medical historian." "No," Evelyn's voice remained calm. "You're not." Something in the answer made Lauren's face tighten. She stepped closer. "I'm trying to avoid embarrassing you. You're doing a poor job." For the first time, Courtney looked directly at Evelyn. There was no anger in the older woman's expression, only a sadness so controlled it carried more weight than shouting. Lauren heard it as defiance. Her posture stiffened. "This conversation is over. I'm waiting for Thomas Reed. You will wait outside. It's raining. That is not the Foundation's concern." Evelyn looked toward the glass wall. Rain streaked down it in long, shifting lines. Beyond the entrance, buses groaned at the corner and headlights stretched across the wet street. Inside, champagne moved on silver trays. The distance between those two worlds was less than 20 feet. Lauren made it feel like a border. A catering supervisor entered from the ballroom carrying a clipboard. Rachel Brooks was 34, wearing a black service jacket with her hair pulled back neatly. She slowed when she saw Evelyn. Her eyes moved to the mud on the floor, then to Lauren's folded arms, then to Evelyn's face. Something about the name badge clipped to Evelyn's invitation pocket seemed to catch her attention. "Ms. Pierce," Rachel said carefully, "do you need help?" "No." Rachel looked again at Evelyn. "Ma'am, Are you here for? Lauren cut her off. Return to the dining room. Rachel hesitated. The hesitation lasted only a second. But Evelyn saw it. Lauren saw it too. Now. Rachel's jaw tightened. She turned away. Before disappearing through the ballroom doors, she looked back once. Evelyn was standing exactly where Lauren had stopped her. Still wet. Still holding the canvas bag. Still waiting. The screen changed again. This time it displayed the Foundation's board of directors beneath a headline announcing Nathan Cole's proposed international healthcare investment. $2 billion. The guests inside applauded at something Evelyn could not see. Lauren glanced towards the ballroom, anxious now. You need to leave before Mr. Cole arrives. Why? Because this evening has consequences. Evelyn studied her. So does this. Lauren's eyes sharpened. Is that a threat? No. Evelyn shifted the bag higher on her shoulder. It's an observation. A nearby couple slowed as they passed. The woman looked at Evelyn's torn sleeve. The man looked at Lauren. Neither stopped. Lauren drew in a controlled breath. Then she reached toward a radio clipped discreetly beneath her jacket. Evelyn watched her hand move. She could have opened the bag. She could have shown the old notebook. She could have pointed to the copied diagrams. She could have explained that the treatment being celebrated had begun with her calculations. She could have opened the sealed envelope and ended the question of who belonged. Instead, she remained silent. Not because she lacked proof, because she wanted to know how far the Foundation would go when it believed she had none. Lauren pressed the radio button. Security to the main lobby. The request sounded soft, professional, almost ordinary. Courtney stopped breathing for a moment. Rachel, watching through the narrow opening between the ballroom doors, went still. Evelyn looked once more at the screen carrying someone else's name over her work. Then she faced Lauren. All right, she said quietly. Lauren mistook the words for surrender. A small smile returned to her face. But Evelyn had not agreed to leave. She had decided to let the room reveal itself. And beyond the ballroom doors, more than 100 powerful people were about to discover how comfortable silence could become before it turned into shame. Security Officer David Mills arrived from the East Corridor less than a minute after Lauren called. He moved with the steady caution of a man accustomed to crowded rooms and fragile situations. His black suit was plain, his radio clipped near his shoulder, his expression neutral until he saw Evelyn standing beneath the glowing screen. Mud on her shoes, rain darkening her clothes, an invitation folded in one hand. Lauren standing between her and the ballroom like a locked gate. David looked from one woman to the other. What's going on? Lauren answered before Evelyn could speak. This woman forced her way inside and is refusing to leave. Evelyn's gaze shifted to David. I walked through the front door. Lauren's smile tightened. She has become increasingly confrontational. David noticed that Evelyn's voice had not risen. He noticed her hands were visible. He noticed the small trail of rainwater beneath her shoes, but no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no frightened guests. Ma'am, he said, do you have identification? Evelyn held it out. Lauren stepped between them. I already checked it. David did not take his eyes off Evelyn. And the invitation? She copied it. Evelyn offered the cream card. David reached for it. Lauren caught his wrist lightly. The gesture was polite enough to disguise the warning. We don't need to encourage this. David looked at her hand. Lauren released him. Around them, more guests were beginning to notice. The reception desk sat directly outside the ballroom, and the brass-framed doors had been opened wider to accommodate arrivals. What had begun as a quiet confrontation now occupied the center of the Foundation's grand entrance. A man near the coat check paused while removing his gloves. A hospital administrator whispered to her companion, Several donors turned their chairs slightly inside the ballroom so they could watch without appearing to watch. The room was learning Evelyn's humiliation as entertainment. Lauren sensed the growing attention and raised her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption." Evelyn's face changed. "Only slightly," Lauren continued. "We have an unstable individual attempting to gain access to a private medical event. Security is handling the matter." The word unstable traveled farther than any shout. People looked at Evelyn differently after that. Some with suspicion, some with pity, others with relief that Lauren had supplied an explanation, allowing them to remain uninvolved. Evelyn stood beneath the enormous screen showing the treatment she had designed. Her name absent above her, her character now being rewritten below it. For one brief moment, pain pressed through her composure. Not enough to bend her. Enough to remind her how efficiently institutions could erase a person twice. First from history, then from the present. David glanced around the lobby. "Ms. Pierce," he said quietly, "maybe we should check the registry." Lauren's jaw tightened. "We are not delaying the event for this. It would take 10 seconds. The event begins in 12 minutes. Then we have 10 seconds. Lauren stepped closer to him. Her voice dropped. "I am responsible for guest access. You are responsible for security." The meaning was clear. Do your job. Do not question mine. Evelyn watched David absorb it. He was a decent man inside a system that rewarded obedience. She had met many like him. People who recognized wrong, but waited for permission to call it wrong. Lauren turned toward the ballroom. Michael, Chief Operating Officer Michael Grant, stood near the stage entrance with a phone pressed to one ear. He had been watching the exchange for several minutes. His tuxedo fit perfectly. His silver tie matched the foundation crest. A small lapel pin identified him as senior leadership. He ended the call and walked toward them. Every step was measured. He smiled at two donors as he passed, then allowed the smile to disappear once he reached Evelyn. "What seems to be the problem?" Lauren spoke smoothly. "This woman arrived without valid credentials. She claims Dr. Reed invited her, but she refuses to leave." "I have not refused to leave," Evelyn said. Michael looked at her as though surprised she could speak for herself. "What have you done?" "I asked someone to check my name." Michael turned to Courtney. "Is she listed?" Courtney froze. She had not searched. The tablet rested directly in front of her. Her fingers hovered above the screen. Lauren answered for her. "No." Courtney looked up sharply. Lauren held her gaze. The young receptionist swallowed. Michael accepted the answer. "All right." Evelyn studied him. "You didn't ask her." "Excuse me?" "You asked a question, but you didn't wait for the person holding the list to answer." Michael glanced toward Courtney. The receptionist immediately lowered her eyes. A red flush rose along her cheeks. Michael returned his attention to Evelyn. "Ma'am, this is a private event involving several high-profile guests. We cannot verify every claim made by someone who walks in from the street." "Then why maintain a guest list?" A few people nearby heard that. One man smiled faintly into his wineglass. Michael did not. "Because invited guests are expected to arrive appropriately." The sentence settled heavily between them. Evelyn looked down at her torn sleeve, then back at him. "Appropriately dressed? Appropriately prepared. For what?" Michael's patience thinned. "For a room like this." There it was, not as crude as Lauren's directions to the shelter, not as open, but no less clear. Evelyn turned toward the ballroom. The chandeliers shone above white tablecloths and silver place settings. The stage displayed the foundation's crest beside Nathan Cole's name. A countdown clock near the podium showed 9 minutes until the investment announcement. Every detail had been arranged to project progress, yet the old architecture remained beneath it. Power near the stage, silence at the tables. People like Evelyn kept outside. Rachel Brooks stood beside a service station just inside the ballroom doors. She had been watching Lauren from the moment the radio call went out. Now she stepped closer. "Mr. Grant?" Michael turned. Rachel held her clipboard against her chest. "I saw a Carter on the seating chart." Lauren's eyes hardened. "What?" Rachel's voice became less certain, but she continued. "Evelyn Carter. I noticed it this afternoon because Dr. Reed's table had one place left open." For the first time, a ripple moved through the crowd. Michael glanced at Lauren. Lauren answered too quickly. "It could be another Evelyn Carter." Rachel looked at Evelyn, then at the invitation. "The table number should be printed inside the card." Evelyn opened it. 14, Rachel nodded. "That's Dr. Reed's table." The silence changed. Not enough to become support, enough to become doubt. Lauren felt it. She stepped toward Rachel. "This is not your responsibility. I'm only saying the name may be there. You're a catering supervisor." Rachel's face tightened. "I know." "Then supervise the catering." The words were soft. Their effect was not. Rachel worked for an outside company whose contract with Ashford accounted for nearly half its annual revenue. One complaint from Lauren could cost Rachel not only her position, but the jobs of dozens of people working behind her. Lauren knew that. Everyone close enough to hear knew it. Rachel looked at Evelyn. The older woman gave her the smallest nod. Not permission to retreat. Understanding. Rachel had spoken once. That alone had cost something. Michael checked the countdown clock. 7 minutes. His phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Cole motorcade arriving. His face changed instantly. He pulled Lauren aside. "End this now." "I'm trying." "Then try harder." "He's at the building?" 2 minutes out. Lauren looked toward the entrance. Outside, the rain had deepened. Headlights moved beneath the glass canopy. Valets straightened. An event coordinator rushed to the doors. Everything important to Michael was arriving. Everything inconvenient stood before him in wet shoes. He turned toward David. "Remove her." David hesitated. "She may be on the list." "We will deal with that after the announcement." Evelyn spoke. "No." Michael stared at her. "No? You will not deal with me after you finish celebrating my work." His expression shifted, only slightly, but Evelyn saw it. So did Rachel. Michael's eyes flicked toward the digital screen. The medical diagram continued rotating above them. "What did you say?" Evelyn looked up at the image. "Page 19. Michael's face remained blank. Lauren laughed. "Now she's claiming the presentation belongs to her." "I said the diagram came from page 19. "Of what?" Evelyn placed one hand over her canvas bag. "My notebook." A murmur passed through the nearest tables. Michael stepped closer. "What notebook?" Evelyn met his gaze. "The one your foundation has been copying for 20 years. For the first time, real uncertainty entered the room. Michael looked at the bag. Lauren looked at it too. The worn canvas no longer seemed harmless. A guest near the stage raised his phone. Another turned fully in his chair. Still, no one defended her. Curiosity was easier than courage. Lauren recovered first. "She's delusional." Evelyn's face went still. Lauren raised her voice again. "Security, please remove this woman before she causes further disruption." David stepped forward reluctantly. Ma'am, I need you to come with me." Evelyn did not move. Behind him, the string quartet began tuning again. Michael had signaled them to prepare. A violin released a thin, trembling note into the tension. The sound felt wrong. Music returning before justice. Michael turned toward the musicians. "Begin the opening piece." Rachel stared at him. "Sir? We are not allowing this to derail the evening." The quartet began, softly at first, then louder. The foundation attempted to cover humiliation with music. Guests shifted in their seats. Some turned away from Evelyn. Others welcomed the excuse to resume conversation. Within seconds, the room began rebuilding its normal appearance around her suffering. That hurt more than the insults. Evelyn looked across the ballroom, at surgeons who had sworn to do no harm, at donors who described themselves as humanitarians, at executives who spoke publicly about access, fairness, and healing. Not one stood. Not one asked Lauren to stop. The music swelled. David reached toward Evelyn's arm. She stepped back, not in fear, to protect the bag against her side. "Do not touch me," she said calmly, "until someone checks the invitation." Lauren's patience snapped. "You've had your chance." She moved around the reception station. A waiter passing behind her carried a tray of drinks toward the ballroom. Lauren cut directly into his path. He stopped too quickly. The tray tipped. Champagne glasses rattled. A tall glass of Coke slid toward the edge. Lauren caught it before it fell. For a moment, she stood holding the cold glass in one hand. Ice shifted inside. Evelyn watched her. So did Rachel. So did David. The room had one last chance to interrupt what was coming. No one did. Lauren looked at Evelyn's torn coat, then at the drink, and something cruel and deliberate settled behind her eyes. Lauren wrapped her fingers around the cold glass. Tiny beads of condensation slid across her hand before falling onto the polished floor. The waiter stood frozen. I'm sorry," he stammered. You almost dropped it," Lauren interrupted. "I've got it." She never looked at him again. Instead, her attention returned to Evelyn. The room seemed to shrink. Music from the string quartet continued somewhere in the background, but it sounded distant now, as though the musicians were performing several floors away. David Mills noticed the way Lauren was holding the glass. Not naturally, too carefully, as if she had suddenly found another purpose for it. "Lauren," he said quietly. She ignored him. Evelyn remained exactly where she was. Her canvas bag rested against her left side, one hand lightly gripping the strap. The sealed envelope lay safely beneath the notebook. She could already feel dozens of eyes measuring every movement she made. Some curious, some uncomfortable, most determined to remain uninvolved. Lauren took one slow step forward. "You've made enough trouble for one evening." Evelyn answered calmly. "I asked for my name to be checked." "I said no." "You did. So we're finished." "No." Lauren's smile returned, except this time there was no trace of politeness behind it. "We're not." Without warning, she lifted the glass. For the briefest instant, several people assumed she meant to hand it to the waiter. Instead, she turned her wrist. The stream of dark soda poured directly across the front of Evelyn's coat. Cold liquid splashed over the patched fabric, across the sweater beneath, down both sleeves. Ice cubes struck her shoulder, bounced against the notebook inside the canvas bag, and scattered across the marble with sharp little clicks. The final drops landed near Evelyn's shoes. Then silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that arrives after everyone has watched something happen that cannot be undone. The quartet stopped playing. One violin note hung unfinished before disappearing. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand somewhere inside the ballroom. It didn't break. It simply rolled slowly across the carpet. No one bent to stop it. Evelyn closed her eyes for one heartbeat. The Coke was cold. Colder than she expected. It soaked through the wool almost instantly. She could feel it running along her ribs beneath the sweater. Sticky, uncomfortable, humiliating. She opened her eyes again. Her first movement surprised everyone watching. She ignored her coat completely. Instead, she opened the canvas bag just enough to reach inside. Her fingers touched the wax paper surrounding the notebook. Dry. Relief crossed her face. Only then did she close the flap again. Lauren noticed. "You care more about that old junk than yourself," Evelyn didn't answer. She carefully brushed one melting ice cube away from the opening of the bag. Another slid down her sleeve onto the floor. Around them, people continued staring. No one stepped closer. No one spoke. No one told Lauren she had gone too far. Michael Grant stood perfectly still near the ballroom entrance. His expression had changed. Not to shame, to calculation. He glanced toward the entrance doors, then toward the countdown clock. 4 minutes until Nathan Cole's scheduled appearance. His entire evening balanced on those 4 minutes. The last thing he wanted was police, or shouting, or witnesses. He looked at Lauren. She had already crossed a line. Now he needed the problem to disappear before Nathan arrived. He walked toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. End this. I am. Not like this. She's leaving. Michael looked at Evelyn. She remained standing exactly where she had been before the coke touched her. Almost impossibly calm. That unsettled him more than anger would have. People who shouted could be removed. People who stayed calm forced everyone else to explain themselves. David finally stepped between the women. That's enough. Lauren turned sharply. What? You shouldn't have done that. I defended the event. You poured a drink on a guest. She isn't a guest. You never checked. Lauren's jaw tightened. For the first time that evening, someone had openly challenged her. Not loudly, not dramatically, simply by stating the obvious. She laughed once, a short, brittle sound. So now you're taking her side? I'm taking the side of common sense. Several nearby guests exchanged uneasy glances. One donor quietly set his wineglass on a table. A physician folded his arms. Still, neither moved closer. The silence remained mostly intact. Inside the ballroom, Rachel Brooks stared in disbelief. She had watched every second. The first insult, the false accusations. Now this. She looked around the room. People she had served dinner to for years sat perfectly still. One couple continued eating. A man checked messages on his phone. Someone whispered, "Let's hope this ends quickly." Rachel felt something inside her break. She grabbed a clean white service towel from a nearby station. Another server reached for her arm. Rachel. She gently pulled free. I'm done pretending I don't see this. She walked straight across the ballroom. Lauren spotted her immediately. What are you doing? Rachel never answered. She stopped in front of Evelyn, held out the folded towel. I'm so sorry. The words were barely louder than breathing. Evelyn accepted the towel, not to wipe away the coke. Instead, she carefully dried the outside of the canvas bag. Then she smiled. A real smile. Small, warm. You have a kind heart. Rachel's eyes filled instantly. I should have said something sooner. You just did. Lauren stepped forward. Rachel. No response. I said, her voice sharpened, return to your station. Rachel slowly faced her. I can't. You work for this event. I work for the catering company. You work here tonight. I also work for my conscience. Several people nearby looked up. Lauren's face flushed. You are dangerously close to losing your contract. Rachel nodded. I know. Then think carefully. I have. The answer echoed quietly through the lobby. Almost the same words Evelyn had once spoken 20 years earlier in another room. Lauren didn't know that. Evelyn did. For a brief moment, she looked at Rachel with something deeper than gratitude. Recognition. The courage looked different, but it felt familiar. Across the ballroom, another chair scraped against polished flooring. Everyone turned. An older woman was standing. Susan Hale, 66 years old, retired emergency room nurse. Silver hair, dark green evening dress. She had attended dozens of Ashford fundraising dinners over the years, Never once had she interrupted one. Until now. I saw everything, her voice carried clearly. No shouting, no trembling. She never raised her voice. Nobody answered. Susan looked directly at David. Officer, I'm not a police officer. No, she nodded. But you're security. Yes. Then secure the right person. A ripple moved through the crowd. Tiny, almost invisible. Yet something had shifted. One person had spoken. Then another. The room was beginning to divide. Michael recognized the danger immediately. If more witnesses found their voices, everything could collapse. He turned sharply toward the musicians. Keep playing. Nobody moved. I said keep playing. The quartet looked at one another. Finally, the cellist lifted his instrument. Slowly, reluctantly. Music returned, soft enough to seem almost apologetic. Michael forced a smile toward the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, he spread his hands. Please enjoy the evening. The words sounded absurd beneath the circumstances. Almost no one resumed eating. Almost no one resumed talking. The music couldn't cover what everyone had already seen. Lauren realized it too. She looked around the room. Something had changed. Not enough. But enough. People were no longer watching Evelyn. They were watching her. That realization unsettled her. She pointed toward the entrance. David. He didn't move. Escort her out. Still nothing. That's an order. David looked at Evelyn, then at the soaked coat, then at the towel folded carefully over the canvas bag. Finally, he looked back at Lauren. I think someone should check the invitation first. Lauren stared at him. You don't trust me? I trust procedures. You work for this foundation. I work security. And security follows management. David answered quietly. Security follows facts. The silence deepened once more. Outside, headlights swept across the rain-covered entrance. A long black sedan rolled beneath the glass canopy. Valets straightened instantly. Event coordinators hurried toward the curb. Michael turned toward the window. His expression changed. Nathan Cole had arrived. No one inside the lobby noticed. No one except Courtney. She looked through the glass, then back toward Evelyn, then toward Lauren. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps it couldn't have been better, because as the rear passenger door opened beneath the falling rain, a billionaire stepped onto the sidewalk, and 30 feet away, a tiny silver pin, loosened by the weight of the soaked canvas bag, slipped silently from its fabric seam. It struck the marble floor once, twice, then began rolling across the lobby toward the entrance. The silver pin spun over the marble in a widening circle, flashing beneath the chandeliers each time its polished surface caught the light. No one moved to stop it. Lauren was still facing David, anger tightening every line of her posture. Michael stood near the ballroom doors, pretending to restore order while watching the entrance through the reflection in the glass. Rachel remained beside Evelyn, with the white towel held carefully against the soaked canvas bag. The pin rolled past a table leg, past a pair of polished shoes, past the edge of the gray carpet. Then it slowed near the brass-framed doors just as Nathan Cole stepped inside. Rain glistened across the shoulders of his dark overcoat. At 56, Nathan carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to entering rooms where everyone already knew his name. 2 executives followed him, along with his assistant, Claire Bennett, who held a leather portfolio containing the final investment documents. A foundation representative hurried forward. Mr. Cole, welcome. We're honored. Nathan did not hear the rest. His eyes had dropped to the floor. The silver pin completed one final turn and came to rest inches from his right shoe. He stopped so abruptly that Claire nearly walked into him. What is it? She asked. Nathan said nothing. He bent slowly and picked up the pin. The symbol was simple. 2 narrow lines crossing inside a silver circle. Time had dulled the edges, but the design remained unmistakable. Nathan held it in his palm. A tremor moved through his hand. 17 years earlier, he had seen that same mark stamped at the top of a photocopied medical protocol while lying in a hospital bed with machines breathing and beeping around him. He had been 39 then, a successful investor with a growing company, a new house outside the city, and the absolute conviction that money could solve almost anything. Then his blood began clotting without warning. Doctors moved him from one specialist to another. Treatments failed. His organs began showing signs of damage. The people around him lowered their voices whenever they entered the room. Nathan remembered the ceiling tiles more clearly than the doctors' faces. He remembered counting them at night. He remembered thinking that he might die before sunrise. Then a hematologist arrived carrying a handwritten protocol copied from an experimental program in Boston. At the top of the first page was the intersecting line symbol. The treatment worked. Slowly, painfully, but it worked. Nathan survived. Years later, when he tried to identify the researcher who designed the protocol, he found only conflicting records. The Ashford Foundation credited a senior executive team. A retired physician told him privately that the true lead researcher had been pushed out after refusing to sign false documents. Her identity had vanished from the official history. Nathan never stopped looking. Now the symbol rested in his hand. He raised his eyes. 30 feet away stood Evelyn Carter. Coke darkened the front of her coat. Her sweater clung to one shoulder where the liquid had soaked through. Mud stained the hem of her trousers. Rachel held a white towel around the canvas bag, as though protecting something fragile. Lauren pointed toward Evelyn. "This woman is being removed." Nathan's gaze remained fixed on the older woman. Something in her face struck him. Not familiarity. Recognition of another kind. He had seen that stillness before in physicians who knew a patient was in danger but refused to surrender to panic. Calm built not from comfort, but from discipline. Claire followed his stare. "Nathan?" He closed his fingers around the pin. "Where did this come from?" The foundation representative looked confused. "I'm sorry? This pin?" No one answered. Then Rachel spoke from across the lobby. It fell from her bag. Every head turned toward Evelyn. Lauren's expression changed. The pin had seemed worthless moments earlier. Nathan's interest transformed it. "That belongs to me," Evelyn said. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the room. Nathan took one step forward. Lauren immediately moved to intercept him. "Mr. Cole, I apologize for this unpleasant disruption. We had an individual enter without proper credentials, and unfortunately, she became aggressive when asked to leave." Rachel's eyes widened. Susan Hale stepped farther from her table. "That is not what happened." Lauren turned sharply. Susan did not sit down. The retired nurse stood with both hands resting against the back of her chair, her face pale but steady. "I watched from the beginning," she continued. "That woman asked for her name to be checked. She did not threaten anyone." Several guests shifted in their seats. Lauren gave Susan a warning smile. "There has clearly been some confusion." "No," Susan said. "There has been cowardice." The word landed hard. A few people looked down. Others looked toward Michael. Susan's voice trembled now, but she kept speaking. "I was part of the silence. I watched longer than I should have. So did nearly everyone else in this room." No one contradicted her. The quartet had stopped again. One of the violinists slowly lowered her bow. Lauren faced Michael as if expecting him to end the interruption. Michael stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, perhaps we should move to the private reception room. The announcement is ready, and we can address this afterward." Nathan did not move. His eyes shifted to Evelyn's canvas bag. "May I ask your name?" "Evelyn Carter." The answer struck him with visible force. Claire looked at him. He whispered the name once. Carter. Lauren tried to laugh. It's a common name. Nathan ignored her. He opened his hand and studied the pin again. Where did you get this? Evelyn looked at the symbol. For the first time since the coke had struck her, something tender moved across her face. It was given to 7 members of a research team 20 years ago. Nathan's breathing slowed. Which team? Evelyn did not answer immediately. The lobby waited. Rain tapped against the glass wall. A bus groaned at the corner outside. Inside, more than 100 wealthy guests leaned forward, as if the truth were another form of entertainment. Evelyn saw that too. She reached for the pin, but Nathan did not release it yet. Not out of disrespect, out of disbelief. His voice dropped. Was that symbol used on a blood stabilization protocol? Michael's face tightened. Lauren looked from Nathan to Evelyn. Rachel stopped breathing. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Yes. A murmur spread through the ballroom. Nathan took another step toward her. 3 timed infusions, he said. A delayed stabilizing agent after the second interval. Evelyn's expression changed. Only someone who had seen the original notes would know that detail. Nathan continued. The version I saw had handwritten corrections in blue ink. Evelyn looked at the pin in his hand. Page 19. The words hit him like a door opening. He had spent 17 years hearing fragments. Anonymous researcher, disputed authorship, protocol hidden in internal archives. Now the woman stood before him in a coke-soaked coat, while the institution built upon her work tried to throw her into the rain. Lauren sensed the room turning. Her voice became urgent. Mr. Cole, please. This woman has made several claims, but we have no proof she is connected to the foundation. Rachel lifted the towel from the canvas bag. There is a notebook. Lauren stared at her. Stay out of this. Rachel's fear returned. For 1 second, she looked toward the catering station, toward the employees depending on the evening's contract, toward the ballroom manager who had warned them never to interfere with donors. Then she looked at Evelyn. The older woman had given Martha her coat that morning, helped Calvin without payment, carried medicine through freezing water, and now stood soaked and alone because people with titles had mistaken cruelty for authority. Rachel straightened. No. Lauren blinked. Rachel spoke louder. I will not stay out of it. A hush settled over the service staff. Several servers looked at one another. One set down a tray, another moved closer to Rachel. Lauren's face flushed. You are finished here. Rachel nodded once. Then I'm finished. She turned to Evelyn and gently placed the white towel around her shoulders. The simple act changed the room more than any speech had. Until that moment, Evelyn had been isolated in the center of the lobby. Now someone stood beside her. Susan crossed the ballroom and joined them. David Mills moved away from Lauren and positioned himself near Evelyn's other side, not touching her, but making it clear he would no longer force her toward the door. The silence began to crack. A physician near the front whispered, "Check the list." Someone behind him repeated it. "Check the list." Courtney looked at the tablet. Lauren snapped, "Don't." Courtney's hands shook. For 3 months, she had obeyed every instruction. Tonight, she had watched an invitation ignored, a guest humiliated, and a drink poured while she stood close enough to stop at least part of it. She touched the search bar, typed Evelyn. The screen loaded. Her eyes widened. Michael saw it. "What does it say?" Courtney swallowed. "So, Evelyn Carter." Lauren stepped toward her. Courtney turned the tablet so the room could see. Guest of Dr. Thomas Reed, Table 14, Special Research Honoree. The words hung in the air. Lauren's face emptied. Michael closed his eyes briefly. Nathan looked toward the giant screen above the ballroom. The copied medical diagram continued rotating beneath the foundation's crest. Then he looked back at Evelyn. The old notebook, the silver pin, the initials, the name on the guest list. Pieces of a truth long hidden were assembling in front of him. He finally placed the pin in Evelyn's open palm. But he did not step away. Instead, he asked the question that stopped every whisper in the room. "Dr. Carter, were you the one who wrote the original protocol?" Evelyn closed her fingers around the silver symbol. Her eyes moved across the silent crowd before settling on Nathan. And in that moment, the institution that had erased her name waited to hear whether she would speak it back into history. Evelyn opened her hand. The silver pin rested against her palm, dulled by time but still carrying the same two intersecting lines she had drawn 20 years earlier. She looked at Nathan. "I did not work on the original protocol," she said. The words were quiet. Still, everyone heard them. Lauren's shoulders loosened slightly, as if she believed the confusion had finally ended. Then Evelyn continued, "I designed it." The room changed. Not with a gasp, not immediately. The transformation began in smaller ways. A surgeon near the stage stopped reaching for his wine. A donor lowered her phone. One of the quartet musicians turned fully in Evelyn's direction. Michael Grant's face lost what remained of its color. Nathan stood motionless. For 17 years, he had imagined the person behind the protocol as a distant figure hidden somewhere in an archive, a researcher reduced to rumors, missing signatures, and handwritten corrections. He had never imagined finding her beneath a torn coat, standing in a puddle of coke while people who profited from her work questioned whether she belonged indoors. He took one slow breath. "You designed the infusion sequence?" "Yes." "The delayed stabilizer?" "Yes." "The temperature adjustment before the third interval?" Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "That was added after the first adverse response. The formula was right. The delivery rate was wrong." Nathan closed his eyes. The answer matched the private notes he had read years earlier. Not the polished journal article, not the Foundation's anniversary booklet, the original emergency protocol. He opened his eyes again. "You saved my life." Lauren stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, I understand this is emotional, but anyone could repeat details from a published study." Evelyn turned toward her. "The temperature adjustment was never published." Lauren stopped. Nathan looked toward the giant screen above the ballroom entrance. The medical diagram continued rotating in pale blue and red. He pointed to the second infusion line. "That line is angled differently from the standard version." Evelyn followed his gesture. 7 degrees. Nathan's voice nearly failed. "That's what was written in the margin. It reduced the pressure surge." Michael cut in. "This is becoming highly inappropriate." Nathan turned to him. "Inappropriate?" Michael's mouth opened, then closed. Nathan stepped closer to the screen. "The treatment your foundation is celebrating tonight used the same sequence that kept me alive. I've read every version I could find. The published paper removed the handwritten notes, but the diagrams stayed almost exactly the same." He pointed toward Evelyn's bag. "May I see the notebook?" Lauren immediately spoke. "No private materials should be opened in the lobby." Evelyn looked at her. "The lobby became acceptable when you poured a drink on me." A murmur moved through the crowd. Lauren flushed. Nathan said nothing more. He simply waited. Evelyn studied him. He was powerful now, recognized, surrounded by assistants and investors. But beneath that, she could still see the patient he had once been. The fear remained in his eyes. Not fear of the room, memory of fear. She loosened the canvas bag. Rachel held the white towel aside while Evelyn carefully removed the wax paper bundle. Her fingers moved with the same care she had used in the laboratory, precise even under pressure. She untied the cord. The leather notebook emerged. Its cover was cracked at the spine. Water had darkened one corner, but the pages remained protected. The initials EC were pressed near the bottom. Nathan stared at them. Evelyn opened the book. Page after page carried handwritten tables, diagrams, and calculations in blue and black ink. Some sheets were crowded with corrections. Others contained only a few lines written late at night in hurried script. She stopped at page 19. The ballroom screen displayed the modern version above them. The original rested in her hands below. They were almost identical. Even the small spacing error beside the third interval remained. Nathan leaned closer. His assistant Claire stood beside him, one hand pressed over her mouth. "That is the mark," Nathan said. At the top corner of the page, beside the date, appeared the same intersecting line symbol engraved on the silver pin. Evelyn touched it. "We used it to separate original trial notes from administrative copies." Nathan looked at the page, then at the screen. "They copied everything." "Not everything." "What did they change?" "The names." The answer landed harder than any accusation. Across the room, several board members looked toward Michael. He did not meet their eyes. Lauren folded her arms. "This proves she possessed a notebook. It does not prove ownership." Susan Hale turned toward her. "You still need more?" Lauren ignored her. Nathan's voice hardened. "What would be enough for you?" "Verified records, foundation documentation, witnesses." A voice came from the entrance behind him. "I can provide all three." Everyone turned. Thomas Reed stood beneath the brass doorway, rain glistening on the shoulders of his dark coat. At 68, he moved more slowly than he once had, but nothing about his expression was uncertain. A hospital badge still hung from Hewa's collar. He had come directly from Massachusetts General. He saw Evelyn, the stained coat, the towel around her shoulders, the notebook open in her hands. Then he saw the Coke on the marble. His face filled first with confusion, then grief, then anger. He crossed the lobby. "Evelyn." She looked at him. "You're late." The smallest smile touched his face. "I know." He stopped beside her. His gaze moved to Lauren. "What happened?" No one answered. Rachel did. She was denied entry. Her invitation was ignored. Ms. Pierce poured the drink on her. Thomas looked at Lauren as if trying to understand the sentence. "You poured Coke on Dr. Carter?" Lauren lifted her chin. She behaved aggressively. Thomas turned to David. "Did she?" David did not hesitate this time. "No," Susan spoke. She remained calmer than anyone else in this room. Courtney raised the tablet. Her name was on the list. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the sadness in his face was deeper than anger. He looked around the ballroom, at the screens, at the executives, at the donors who had watched in silence. "We invited her here to correct a 20-year injustice," he said, "and before she could cross the lobby, you repeated it." No one moved. Michael stepped forward. "Thomas, we need to discuss this privately." "No." The word cracked through the room. Thomas removed his coat and handed it to Rachel. Then he faced the crowd. Evelyn Carter led the research team that created the Carter-Reed Stabilization Protocol. A board member near the stage frowned. The official record credits Charles Ashford as principal designer. The official record is false. The room erupted into whispers. Michael raised both hands. "Everyone, please remain calm." Thomas continued over him. Charles Ashford approved the funding. He did not design the treatment. He did not calculate the infusion sequence. He did not discover the stabilizing interval. Evelyn did. He pointed to the notebook. "That is the original laboratory record." Lauren's expression tightened. If this were true, why was her name removed? Thomas looked at Evelyn before answering. "Because she refused to lie." Silence returned. Thomas faced Nathan. Thumb. The Foundation's legal department asked the team to sign an authorship statement naming Charles as principal architect. Evelyn refused. I refused. The others were pressured into silence. "What happened to her?" Nathan asked. Thomas's jaw clenched. She lost her laboratory access, then her position, then years of her life fighting people with more money than she had. He looked at Michael. And the Foundation continued using her work. Michael shook his head. "I was not part of the organization then." "No," Thomas said, "but you knew there was a dispute." "I knew there were competing claims." "You knew enough to keep her name off tonight's program." Every face turned toward the stage. The printed agenda listed Charles Ashford, former directors, current board members, and Nathan Cole. Evelyn Carter appeared nowhere. Michael's voice lowered. The board wanted to avoid legal complications. Evelyn finally spoke. "My existence became a legal complication." Michael looked at her. For the first time, he seemed unable to find a polished answer. Nathan stepped closer to Evelyn. His gaze dropped to the notebook. "When I was sick, the doctors told me the protocol was experimental." "It was," she said. "They said the person who designed it had thought about the body differently." Evelyn smiled faintly. "The body was not the problem. The schedule was." Nathan's face tightened with emotion. "I woke up after the third infusion. My wife was sitting beside me. The doctor told me someone I had never met had given me another chance." He looked at the soaked woman before him. "I have spent 17 years trying to learn your name." Evelyn's expression softened, but only slightly. "You found it tonight." "No." Nathan looked around the room. "They hid it tonight." The distinction struck everyone. Lauren took a step backward. Her confidence had begun to fail. "What exactly do you expect us to do?" she asked. Nathan turned toward her. "First, stop speaking." Her lips parted. No words came. Nathan looked back at Evelyn. "May I ask one more question?" "Yes." "Why did you come here tonight?" Evelyn closed the notebook. Her hand moved to the sealed envelope still inside her bag. Thomas noticed. So did Michael. The change in his face was immediate. He knew the envelope was not ceremonial. Evelyn rested her palm over it. "I came because Dr. Reed said the Foundation was finally ready to tell the truth." She looked at the screen above them. "Now I know it was only ready to celebrate the part of the truth that made it look generous." Nathan's voice lowered. "And the envelope?" Evelyn held his gaze. "That is a different truth." Michael stepped forward too quickly. "This has gone far enough." Evelyn looked at him. "No." Her voice remained calm. "It has only gone as far as you allowed it to go." Outside, rain continued sliding down the glass walls. Inside, the crowd no longer looked away. They watched Evelyn's hand resting over the sealed envelope. Nathan had spent 17 years searching for the woman who saved his life. Now he understood that recognizing her was only the first revelation, because whatever she carried inside that bag had frightened the Foundation before it had even been opened. Michael Grant moved first. Not toward Evelyn, toward the stage. "We need to pause this discussion," he said, forcing authority into a voice that no longer carried it. "There are legal procedures for handling disputed materials, and this reception is neither the time nor the place." Nathan looked at him. The time was 20 years ago. Michael's face tightened. Nathan continued. "The place was the laboratory where her work was taken. No one in the ballroom spoke. The giant screen above them still displayed the Foundation's anniversary message, but its polished words now looked hollow. Transforming modern medicine. Beneath it stood the woman who had done exactly that. Her coat was wet. Coke continued dripping from one cuff, A white catering towel rested around her shoulders. Lauren Pierce remained near the reception desk, her posture rigid, as though refusing to move might somehow restore the power she had lost. Then she stepped toward Nathan. "Mr. Cole," she said, lowering her voice into the polished tone she had used on donors all evening. "I am deeply sorry that you were exposed to this confusion." Nathan slowly turned. Lauren mistook his silence for permission to continue. "We believed Dr. Carter was an intruder. Her appearance, her behavior, the lack of proper confirmation." "Stop." Nathan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Lauren fell silent. He looked at the Coke stain spreading across Evelyn's coat, then at the invitation still lying near the edge of the puddle where Lauren had knocked it from her hand. "You believed she was an intruder," he said. "Yes." "So you poured a drink on her." Lauren swallowed. "I reacted to a difficult situation." "You created the situation." "I was protecting the event." "From what?" Lauren's eyes moved toward Evelyn. She seemed to search for a word that would not expose what everyone already understood. Nathan waited. The room waited with him. Finally, Lauren said, "From someone who appeared not to belong." The sentence was quieter than her earlier insults. It was also more revealing. Nathan looked around the ballroom, at the donors, at the physicians, at the foundation board. Many of them lowered their eyes. He returned his attention to Lauren. She appeared not to belong because she was wet. Lauren said nothing. Because her coat was torn? No answer. Because she arrived by bus instead of stepping out of a black car? Her face reddened. Nathan took one step closer. Or because she was a black woman you believed had no power? Lauren's lips parted. The silence answered for her. Evelyn watched Nathan carefully. She had spent years seeing men use power as a performance. Raised voices, threats. People interrupted before they could finish speaking. Nathan did none of that. He simply refused to let Lauren hide behind softer words. That mattered. Still, Evelyn did not need rescuing. She had never come seeking rescue. Nathan seemed to understand. He turned away from Lauren and faced Evelyn. The room watched him reach out his right hand. Not dramatically, not as a command. He held it between them, palm open. A choice. Evelyn looked at it. For 20 years, powerful institutions had offered her hands only when they wanted a signature, silence, or surrender. This one asked for nothing. She placed her hand in his. Nathan's fingers closed gently around hers. The image traveled through the ballroom before a single phone camera captured it. A billionaire healthcare investor in a tailored black suit standing beside a coke-soaked woman in a patched coat. The man whose arrival the foundation had spent months preparing for. The woman they had tried to throw into the rain, together beneath a screen displaying her stolen work. Nathan turned toward the guests without releasing her hand. "My name is Nathan Cole," he said. Almost everyone in the room already knew that. He continued anyway. 17 years ago, I was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder. I was told that standard treatment had failed, and that I might not survive the week. Claire Bennett stood several feet behind him, tears bright in her eyes. Nathan's voice remained steady. A physician brought in an experimental protocol developed in Boston. It used a timed sequence and a stabilizing step that did not appear in any standard medical text at the time. He looked at Evelyn. That protocol saved my life. The room remained motionless. I tried to identify the lead researcher. The records directed me towards senior executives and foundation statements. But the deeper I looked, the less the official story made sense. Thomas Reed stepped beside Evelyn. Nathan nodded toward him. Dr. Reed eventually confirmed that the researcher had been pushed out after refusing to approve false credit. Michael's expression sharpened. "Thomas, you disclosed confidential records?" Thomas did not look at him. I disclosed the truth. Nathan faced the crowd again. For 17 years, I searched for the person who gave me a future. He raised Evelyn's hand slightly. I found her tonight, standing in a puddle of soda, while this institution called her unstable. A quiet sound moved through the room. Not applause, something closer to shame. Several guests turned toward Lauren. Others looked toward Michael. A physician near the stage removed his foundation lapel pin and placed it on the table. Nathan continued. Dr. Evelyn Carter did not merely contribute to the treatment being celebrated tonight. He looked toward the diagram above them. She created the protocol that made it safe. The first phone camera rose near the back of the ballroom, then another. Michael noticed. Please, he said, no recording. This is a private function. Nobody listened. For the first time that evening, his authority failed completely. Lauren took a small step toward Evelyn. Dr. Carter. The title sounded unnatural in her mouth. Evelyn looked at her. Lauren's face had changed. The confidence was gone. Fear had replaced it. I did not know who you were. Evelyn studied her for several seconds. When she answered, her voice held no triumph, only clarity. Would it have been acceptable if I were nobody? Lauren froze. A woman near the front table closed her eyes. Susan Hale lowered her head. Rachel's hands tightened around the edge of the towel. The question passed through the room more powerfully than Nathan's announcement, because it removed the escape everyone wanted. Lauren could not claim the humiliation had become wrong only after Evelyn's importance was revealed. Either the act had always been wrong, or human dignity depended on status. Lauren looked toward Michael. He looked away. She finally whispered, No. Evelyn's gaze did not soften. But you believed it was. Lauren had no answer. Nathan released Evelyn's hand only long enough to remove his overcoat. He placed it carefully around her shoulders, covering the soaked fabric without concealing what had happened. Evelyn started to protest. You'll need it outside. Nathan gave a faint, sad smile. I have spent 17 years owing you more than a coat. She looked at him. You owe me nothing. I owe you my life. No. Her voice remained gentle. You owe the truth your voice. Nathan absorbed that, then nodded. Tonight it has it. Behind them, the anniversary screen changed automatically. A photograph of Charles Ashford appeared beside a quotation about courage and innovation. Thomas walked toward the control station. A technician looked at Michael. Michael said nothing. Thomas pressed a key. The screen went black. The sudden darkness above the stage drew every eye. Then Thomas connected his phone to the system. A scanned image appeared. Page 19, blue ink, handwritten calculations, the intersecting line mark. At the bottom, a signature. Evelyn Carter. The room saw the original at last. No polished foundation seal, no executive portrait. Only the handwriting of the woman they had refused to admit. Applause began from the service entrance. One server, then another. Rachel joined. Susan followed. Soon the sound spread through the ballroom, uneven and emotional. Evelyn did not smile. Not yet. Recognition offered after proof was not the same as courage before it. She looked across the applauding room and saw many of the same faces that had remained seated while Lauren humiliated her. Some clapped from guilt, some from admiration, some because Nathan had shown them which side now held power. Evelyn understood the difference. Nathan did too. He raised one hand. The applause slowly faded. This evening's investment announcement will not proceed as planned. The board members reacted immediately. Michael stepped forward. Nathan, the agreements have been reviewed. We cannot overturn months of work because of one employee's misconduct. One employee? Nathan looked toward Lauren, then toward Michael. You watched. Michael stiffened. So did your board. Several directors protested at once. Nathan spoke over them. I will not invest billions in an institution that celebrates medical access on stage while denying basic dignity at its front door. The sentence struck the room like thunder. Michael's eyes widened. Nathan, please, we can resolve this. That depends on Dr. Carter. Every face turned toward Evelyn again. She had arrived powerless in their eyes. Now the foundation's future seemed to rest in her hands. But Evelyn looked neither pleased nor surprised. She simply reached inside the canvas bag. The room fell silent once more. Her fingers passed the notebook, then closed around the sealed cream envelope. Jackal saw it emerge. Whatever composure remained in his face disappeared. Evelyn, Thomas said quietly. She looked at him. Are you ready? She glanced at the copied diagram on the blackened screen, at Lauren's empty glass, at Rachel standing beside the servers who had finally chosen to be seen, at Nathan, still holding her hand. Then she looked at the envelope. I have been ready for 20 years. The ballroom believed the greatest truth had already been revealed. They were wrong, because the envelope did not merely contain evidence of who Evelyn had been. It contained proof of the power she held now. Evelyn held the cream envelope against her chest. The ballroom had gone so quiet that the soft hiss of rain against the glass walls sounded louder than the guests. Michael Grant stared at the sealed edge. For the first time that evening, he seemed less concerned with appearances than with consequences. Those documents should be reviewed privately, he said. Evelyn looked at him. They were reviewed privately for 20 years. Michael's jaw tightened. This is a legal matter. Yes. Then it should be handled by attorneys. It has been. Before Michael could answer, the main entrance opened again. A man in a dark wool coat stepped inside carrying a slim leather case. Daniel Price was 46, a civil rights and intellectual property attorney, known for taking cases that large institutions expected to bury beneath time, paperwork, and expense. He had a narrow face, tired eyes, and the calm manner of someone who rarely needed to repeat himself. He saw Evelyn beneath Nathan's overcoat. Then he saw the Coke on the floor. His expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. He had spent enough years representing people ignored by powerful organizations to understand a room like this at a glance. Dr. Carter, he said, you made it. The court clerk took longer than expected. Daniel crossed the lobby and stopped beside her. He looked toward Lauren, then Michael. Who assaulted my client? Lauren's face stiffened. It was not an assault. David Mills answered before she could say more. Ms. Pierce deliberately poured a drink on her. Several guests turned toward him. David held their gaze. No hesitation remained in him now. Daniel looked at the empty glass resting on the reception desk, then at the phones still raised around the ballroom. Was it recorded? Susan Hale lifted her phone. So was everything before it. Another guest near the rear raised his hand. I recorded part of it. Rachel spoke. There are security cameras in the lobby. Michael stepped forward. Those recordings belong to the foundation. Daniel gave him a level look. Then preserve them. Michael's face hardened. You cannot give instructions inside my building. Daniel opened his leather case. I can give notice. He removed a thick set of documents bound with a blue cover sheet. A gold federal seal appeared at the top. The board members nearest the stage began whispering. Daniel did not acknowledge them. He handed the first document to Evelyn. She accepted it carefully. Nathan looked at the pages. What is it? Daniel faced him. This afternoon, a federal judge issued a final ruling in Carter versus Ashford Medical Foundation. The name of the case moved through the room in broken whispers. Michael's voice came out sharp. That matter was under seal. Until 4:15 today, Daniel removed another certified copy. The court found that the original transfer of research rights was obtained through fraudulent authorship statements, concealed amendments, and material misrepresentation. Thomas Reed closed his eyes. For years he had hoped to hear those words. Now that they had arrived, they seemed to carry the weight of every year lost before them. Daniel continued. The foundation claimed that Dr. Carter voluntarily surrendered control of the stabilization protocol in exchange for continued employment. Evelyn looked toward Michael. I was dismissed 6 months later. Daniel nodded. The personnel records were altered to suggest the agreement preceded her termination. Newly recovered correspondence proved the opposite. A board member near the front stood. What correspondence? Daniel opened the envelope Evelyn had carried. Inside were copies of emails printed on white legal paper. He lifted the first page. One message from Charles Ashford to the university's general counsel, dated 3 days after Dr. Carter refused the false authorship statement. He read only the final line. If she will not sign, remove her access until she understands the cost. The words filled this ballroom. Nobody breathed. Thomas looked down. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth. Nathan's eyes remained on Evelyn. She showed no outward reaction, but her fingers tightened around the court order. She had seen the email before. Hearing it aloud inside the institution that had celebrated Charles Ashford as a visionary reopened an old wound. Daniel set the page down. The court ruled that the foundation never acquired lawful controlling authority over the protocol. Michael spoke too quickly. That cannot be correct. The foundation has held the licensing rights for 2 decades. It held, Daniel said. It did not own them legally. The distinction struck like a crack through glass. Nathan looked toward Claire. She had already opened the investment portfolio. The international agreement depends on exclusive protocol licensing, she said. Daniel nodded. It does. Every board member turned toward Evelyn. The woman they had refused to admit now stood beneath the chandeliers holding the authority behind their largest planned expansion. Michael stared at Daniel. What exactly has the court restored? Daniel answered without drama. Controlling approval rights for all future licensing, international distribution, derivative treatment platforms, and commercial adaptations connected to the original stabilization protocol. A director whispered, Dear God. Nathan looked at Evelyn. Your signature. She nodded. Nothing moves without it. The countdown screen near the stage still displayed the time remaining before the investment announcement. 0 minutes. The announcement should already have begun. Instead, the foundation's future stood waiting in the hands of a woman whose invitation had been left in a puddle. Michael straightened his jacket. He seemed to gather himself, rebuilding the executive manner that had carried him through years of negotiations. Dr. Carter, he said, forcing warmth into his voice, there has clearly been a terrible failure tonight. Evelyn watched him. We can address Ms. Pierce's conduct immediately. Lauren turned toward him. Michael! He did not look at her. We can suspend her pending investigation. Lauren's face went pale. You told me to remove her. Michael finally glanced at her. I did not instruct you to pour a drink. You told me to end it. Several guests reacted. Michael's eyes flashed. Lauren realized too late that fear had made her speak honestly. Daniel looked from one to the other. Please continue. Neither did. Michael returned to Evelyn. The foundation is prepared to make a formal apology. Evelyn said nothing. We can correct the program tonight. Still nothing. We can add your name to that presentation and issue a statement recognizing your contribution. Thomas looked at him with disbelief. Her contribution? Michael ignored him. He stepped closer to Evelyn. Dr. Carter, thousands of patients depend on continued access to this treatment. The international partnership will expand that access to millions more. Surely you do not want tonight's unfortunate incident to interfere with that mission. There it was, a different form of pressure. 20 years earlier, they had threatened her career. Now they placed patience between her and justice. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. You are asking me to protect sick people from the consequences of your choices. I'm asking you to think beyond yourself. Nathan's expression hardened. Daniel started to speak. Evelyn raised one hand. She did not need either man to answer for her. I have spent 20 years thinking beyond myself. Her voice remained quiet. I helped uninsured adults appeal treatment denials while this foundation collected licensing fees from my work. I explained medical instructions to people your public programs never reached. I sat with patients whose families could not afford to leave work. She looked toward the copied diagram. Do not stand there and suggest I am the danger to access. Michael lowered his voice. Then what do you want? Evelyn glanced around the ballroom. At Rachel, at David, at Courtney behind the registration desk, at the service workers standing along the walls, at the guests who had remained silent until Nathan recognized the pin. Then she looked back at Michael. I want every discrimination complaint filed against this foundation during the past 10 years. His face changed. That is unrelated. No. It has nothing to do with the licensing dispute. It has everything to do with what happened tonight. Michael shook his head. Personnel complaints are confidential. Then appoint an independent reviewer. That cannot be done during a reception. I am not asking you to do it during the reception. She held up the court order. I am telling you what must happen before I sign anything. A murmur spread through the board. Nathan stepped beside her. My investment remains suspended until those conditions are met. Michael turned toward him. You are willing to risk a $2 billion medical expansion over internal complaints? Nathan's answer came immediately. I am unwilling to give $2 billion to an institution afraid of its own records. Applause almost began near the back. It died quickly under the gravity of the moment. Evelyn continued. Every adult researcher whose contribution was removed will be credited publicly. Thomas lowered his head. Every employee complaint will be reviewed outside the foundation. Rachel stared at her. Every visitor and worker will have a complaint process that does not end at the desk of the person accused. Lauren's breathing became shallow, and future licensing revenue will support clinics in communities that cannot afford the treatments built from this protocol. Michael's face tightened with each condition. The board will need time. You had 20 years. That is not how institutional reform works. Evelyn looked at him. That is exactly how delay works. The room absorbed the distinction. Daniel handed her a pen. Not a ceremonial pen, a plain black one. Dr. Carter, the court requires only acknowledgement of receipt tonight. Evelyn signed the final page. Her name moved slowly across the paper. Evelyn Carter. Not fourth, not hidden, not omitted. She handed the document back. Daniel sealed it inside the legal case. Michael looked at the pen in her hand, then at the unsigned licensing agreement still resting inside Claire's portfolio. All the power in the room had shifted, not because Evelyn shouted, not because Nathan threatened, because truth had finally acquired legal weight. Lauren took another step backward. The wet Coke stain on the marble reflected the chandelier above it. For the first time, the Foundation's leaders seemed to understand that the damage did not begin when Nathan recognized Evelyn. It began years earlier, every time they chose silence because silence was profitable. Rachel raised her voice. There are more complaints. Everyone turned toward her. Michael stared. What did you say? Rachel stood straighter. Mine isn't the first. David looked toward the security desk. Courtney's face went pale. A former server near the rear slowly lifted her hand. Then another employee did the same. The hidden records had not even been opened. Yet the people who had been afraid were already beginning to speak. Evelyn watched them. The sealed envelope had revealed her authority, but the next truth would reveal the cost of everyone who had looked away. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The ballroom no longer resembled the carefully orchestrated celebration printed in the evening's program. Crystal chandeliers still cast warm light across polished marble. White tablecloth still covered every dining table. Expensive floral arrangements still filled the room with the scent of lilies. Yet the atmosphere had changed completely. The event had stopped being a ceremony. It had become a reckoning. Rachel Brooks lowered the clipboard she had been carrying all evening. She looked first at Evelyn, then at Daniel Price. Finally, she faced the board members seated near the stage. My complaint wasn't the first one. The words echoed softly through the ballroom. Daniel nodded. Tell them. Rachel drew a careful breath. About 8 months ago, a delivery driver arrived with a medical equipment shipment. He was wearing reflective rain gear because he'd been unloading supplies during a storm. She looked toward Lauren. You refused to let him through the front entrance. Lauren's expression remained frozen. Rachel continued. You said the donors shouldn't have to look at someone dressed like that. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. Rachel swallowed. He had authorization papers in his hand. She paused. You made him stand outside in freezing rain for nearly 40 minutes while the shipment waited. David Mills slowly lowered his head. He remembered that afternoon. He had followed Lauren's instructions. At the time, he told himself it wasn't his decision. Tonight, the memory felt different. Rachel continued. The equipment was for an emergency blood transport. A physician near the front table closed his eyes. Daniel made a brief note. Were you present? Yes. Did you report it? I did. To whom? Rachel looked directly at Michael Grant. His office. Every eye in the ballroom shifted toward Michael. He remained perfectly still. Daniel turned another page in his notebook. What happened after your report? Rachel gave a tired smile. I was told that guest experience required difficult decisions. Silence settled again. Susan Hale stepped forward. I have something too. The retired nurse removed a folded sheet of paper from her handbag. I stopped volunteering here 2 years ago. Michael frowned. I don't recall. No, Susan interrupted gently. You wouldn't. She unfolded the page. I filed a written concern after watching a disabled veteran wait outside this building because security believed he was asking for money. David looked up immediately. I remember him. Susan nodded. He had been invited to speak during a patient appreciation luncheon. She looked toward the crowd. He carried his invitation inside a plastic folder because it was raining. Her voice softened. Someone told him he was making guests uncomfortable. No one asked whether he had been black. No one needed to. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Daniel accepted Susan's copy of the complaint. Was there ever a response? She smiled sadly. I received a letter thanking me for my passion. And? Nothing changed. Thomas Reed closed his eyes. I never knew. Susan looked at him kindly. They made sure you didn't. Near the back of the ballroom, another voice spoke. I resigned because of it. A woman in her 40s stepped forward from the catering staff. She introduced herself as Monica Ellis. She had worked at Ashford for 6 years before transferring to an outside hospitality company. Lauren stared at her. I remember you. Monica nodded. I'm sure you do. She faced Daniel. I used to coordinate guest seating. She hesitated. Lauren instructed us to avoid placing black guests near the front windows during donor events. A ripple of disbelief passed through the room. Lauren shook her head immediately. That's not true. Monica reached into her purse. It is. She removed several folded papers. I kept copies. Daniel accepted them. The documents listed seating assignments beside handwritten initials. Several tables carried small circles. What do these marks mean? Daniel asked. Monica answered quietly. We were told they identified guests who should be moved if important donors requested a better view. Nathan examined one page. Most of the circled names belonged to black physicians, community advocates, delivery coordinators, or scholarship recipients. Not one donor had been circled. Daniel looked toward Lauren. Did you create this system? Lauren's breathing quickened. I managed guest flow. That wasn't my question. Michael stepped between them. This has become a public trial. Daniel looked at him. No. He closed the folder gently. This is the end of private silence. Courtney Hall slowly raised her hand. Her voice shook. I have something too. Everyone turned. She looked terrified. Lauren's eyes locked onto hers. You don't need to. I do. Courtney interrupted before she lost her nerve. 3 weeks after I started working here, I asked why certain complaints disappeared from the database. Michael's head lifted sharply. Courtney continued. I was told they weren't appropriate for permanent records. Daniel asked quietly, Who told you that? She looked at Michael. He did. Michael answered instantly. I instructed staff to archive duplicate complaints. Courtney shook her head. They weren't duplicates. She wiped away tears. I know because I read them. She took a folded flash drive from her pocket. I copied them before they disappeared. The ballroom erupted into whispers. Michael stepped forward. You removed confidential foundation property. Courtney's hands trembled. I protected it. Daniel accepted the flash drive. What does it contain? A backup of deleted complaint files. Nathan looked toward Michael. Deleted? Michael remained silent. Daniel slipped the drive into his case. We'll preserve this properly. Lauren finally found her voice again. This is ridiculous. No one answered. She looked around desperately. The entire foundation is being judged because of misunderstandings. David spoke. No. She turned toward him. You watched me pour the drink. David nodded. I did. You know I was trying to protect the event. I know you humiliated a woman without checking her invitation. Lauren's face fell. David continued. I've worked security for 21 years. He looked around the room. I've made mistakes. His voice grew quieter. But tonight I realized the biggest mistake isn't always doing the wrong thing. He glanced toward Evelyn. Sometimes it's standing still while someone else does. The words settled over the ballroom like snowfall. Several guests lowered their heads. A surgeon quietly removed his name badge. Another donor folded the event program and placed it on the table without looking at it again. Nathan faced the board. My investment remains suspended. One director tried to object. Nathan raised a hand. I'm not finished. He looked toward Evelyn. Unless Dr. Carter tells me otherwise. Every face turned toward her. She remained calm beneath Nathan's coat. The Coke stain still showed beneath the collar. She looked at Rachel, then Monica, then Courtney, then David. People who had finally chosen truth over comfort. Finally, she spoke. I am not interested in destroying this foundation. A few board members looked visibly relieved. Evelyn continued. I know what this treatment has done for patients. She looked toward Nathan. It gave him another life. Toward Thomas. It fulfilled decades of work. Toward Susan. It brought hope to families. She paused. But institutions that heal bodies cannot be allowed to wound people. The room remained completely silent. I will not sign any licensing agreement until independent oversight is established. Daniel nodded. That condition will be included. Evelyn continued. Every employee complaint must be reviewed. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. Every erased researcher must receive public credit. Thomas bowed his head. Every visitor deserves dignity before anyone asks what they own, how they dress, or whose name they carry. Nathan looked toward the board. Those are not demands. He spoke carefully. They are minimum standards. One elderly board member slowly stood. For the first time all evening, someone from the governing body addressed Evelyn directly. My name is Harold Benson. He removed his board pin. I joined this foundation 12 years ago. He looked genuinely shaken. I believed I was serving an institution built on compassion. He glanced toward Michael. I no longer know what I have been serving. Another board member stood beside him. Then another. One by one, directors quietly distanced themselves from the leadership that had protected appearances over truth. Michael looked around the room. The support he expected was disappearing. Lauren understood it too. She had spent years believing the institution would always protect her. Now no one stood beside her. Not even the man who had once praised her for maintaining the foundation's image. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Soft evening light filtered through the clouds beyond the glass walls. Inside, no applause followed. No celebration. Only the quiet recognition that justice rarely arrived with triumph. More often, it arrived with ordinary people deciding they would never remain silent again. And for the first time since she entered the building, Evelyn Carter believed that this room had finally begun to see her. Not as a forgotten scientist, not as an obstacle, not as a symbol, but simply as a human being whose dignity should never have depended on anyone else's permission. 6 months later, the grand ballroom at the Ashford Medical Foundation remained closed. The chandeliers were dark. The brass doors were locked. The marble floor had been stripped, polished, and restored. But one square near the entrance had been left untouched at Evelyn's request. It was the place where the coke had pooled around her shoes. No stain remained. Only a small bronze marker set flush into the stone. Dignity is not a privilege. The foundation board had argued that the words were too direct. Evelyn told them directness was overdue. Across town in Roxbury, a very different building opened its doors beneath a bright winter sky. The Evelyn Carter Adult Community Health Center stood beside the Harbor Street Community Kitchen, where the smell of soup and fresh bread still drifted through the same loading entrance each morning. The new clinic was not grand. It had no crystal chandeliers, no velvet ropes, no donor's entrance. Its walls were warm brick and clear glass. A wide ramp led directly from the sidewalk. The lobby held sturdy chairs, coat hooks, a coffee station, and a large wooden table where volunteers helped adults complete insurance forms. Nobody had to prove they belonged before sitting down. Snow fell lightly over Roxbury that morning, softening the roofs and gathering along the curb in clean white lines. Evelyn arrived on the number 23 bus. She stepped onto the sidewalk wearing the same brown coat. It had been washed, repaired, and patched again. The torn sleeve now carried a square of dark purple fabric, sewn by hand. Beneath it, she wore a simple gray sweater and comfortable shoes. The canvas bag still hung from her shoulder. No driver opened a car door for her. No assistant carried her things. She crossed the sidewalk slowly, while the bus pulled away behind her with a hiss. Frank Willis stood beneath the clinic awning in a new security jacket. He straightened dramatically when he saw her. "Dr. Carter," he said, "we've been expecting someone important." Evelyn smiled. "You should keep waiting." Frank laughed and opened the door. Warm air wrapped around her. The clinic lobby was already full. Martha Lewis sat near the window wearing a blue wool coat donated by one of the churches that had helped rebuild her apartment. At 72, she still moved carefully, but the frightened, shaking Evelyn had seen after the fire was gone. Calvin Price stood beside the reception desk with his arm fully healed. He now coordinated medical supply deliveries for the center and had spent the morning checking every entrance twice to make sure no shipment would ever be left in the rain. Rachel Brooks hurried across the lobby. She wore a navy suit instead of a catering uniform. The independent board had appointed her director of visitor and worker advocacy after reviewing the complaints she had preserved. Her office door carried a simple sign: "Every voice is heard here." Rachel stopped in front of Evelyn. "You took the bus. I like the bus. Nathan sent a car." "I know. He sent two, actually. I saw them." Rachel shook her head. "You are impossible." "So I've been told." They embraced. Over Rachel's shoulder, Evelyn saw David Mills standing near the far wall. He no longer worked under Michael Grant. After testifying during the independent review, David had been asked to redesign security practices across the Foundation's public facilities. His first policy change had been simple. Security would verify facts before following assumptions. Susan Hale stood beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee and speaking with the seriousness of someone reviewing a medical chart. Thomas Reed waited near the main hallway. He looked older than he had 6 months earlier. Lighter, too. The guilt he had carried for years had not disappeared, but it no longer seemed to bend him. He opened his arms. Evelyn walked into them. "I was afraid you'd be late," he said. "I learned from you." "That was one time. It was a very important time." He laughed softly. Then his expression became tender. "We finally put the names up." He led her down the hallway. On one wall hung a broad panel of dark wood under warm, recessed light. At the top, engraved in silver letters, were the words, "The Carter-Reed Stabilization Protocol." Beneath it appeared every adult researcher, technician, nurse, physician, and data specialist whose work had contributed to the treatment. Not only the famous ones, not only the senior ones, every name. Evelyn Carter appeared first, because the historical record required it. She had insisted the lettering be the same size as everyone else's. Thomas stood beside her. "3 families came yesterday," he said. "They saw their relatives' names." Evelyn touched one engraved line. Dr. Patricia Monroe. Patricia had been 47 when the first trial succeeded. She died years later believing the official record would never change. Another name, Samuel Park. 52 during the research period, quiet, brilliant, and repeatedly overlooked. Another, Helen Wright, an adult laboratory technician who had discovered an equipment defect that could have ruined months of work. Their names remained on the wall now. Not as footnotes, as history. Evelyn's eyes filled. She did not wipe the tears away. Thomas stood beside her in silence. Some moments did not need explanation. Nathan Cole arrived without an entourage. He entered through the same front doors as everyone else, wearing a dark wool coat, dusted with snow. The clinic staff recognized him, but nobody rushed to rearrange the room around his presence. That was exactly how he wanted it. In one hand he carried a small wooden box. He found Evelyn near the wall of names. "I brought something." She looked at the box. "You already brought an entire clinic. The licensing revenue built the clinic. You matched it. I'm a poor listener when people tell me not to. That is not a virtue. Sometimes." He opened the box. Inside rested the silver pin. The bent edge had been repaired. The surface had been cleaned, but not polished too brightly. Its small scratches remained visible. Evelyn stared at it. "I thought the original shape mattered," Nathan said. "I didn't want them to erase the years." She looked up at him. "Who repaired it?" "A metalsmith in Cambridge, 63 years old. She said old silver should keep part of its journey." Nathan lifted the pin from the box. "May I?" Evelyn turned slightly. He fastened it to the strap of her canvas bag. The intersecting lines caught the morning light from the windows. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rachel called everyone toward the main clinic room. The opening ceremony was brief. No politicians gave speeches. No executives stood beneath giant photographs of themselves. The foundation's interim chair publicly acknowledged the board's failure, the deleted complaints, the false authorship records, and the silence that allowed Lauren and Michael to keep their authority. Lauren had been terminated and barred from holding another position within the foundation's network. A formal investigation found that she had repeatedly enforced discriminatory access practices and falsified reports when challenged. Michael resigned before the review concluded. His internal emails were later released as part of the public findings. They showed years of ignored complaints and praise for Lauren's protection of the foundation's premium image. Neither person lost everything. Evelyn had refused to demand destruction. They lost the power to harm others inside the system they had abused. The foundation entered independent oversight. Workers received legal protections for reporting mistreatment. Visitors could appeal access to decisions immediately. Licensing revenue from the Carter-Reed Protocol funded treatment programs for uninsured adults throughout Massachusetts. Nathan's international investment eventually moved forward, but only after every reform had been written into binding agreements. Justice had not arrived as revenge. It arrived as structure, as accountability, as doors that opened differently. When Evelyn was invited to speak, she stood before the clinic's adult patients, volunteers, physicians, delivery workers, and neighbors. She looked toward Martha, toward Calvin, toward Rachel and David, toward Thomas, then toward Nathan. "I spent many years believing recognition had come too late," she said. The room remained still. "I lost work I loved. I lost my home. I lost people who should have lived long enough to see their names restored." Her hand rested over the silver pin. But dignity is not something an institution gives you when it finally admits you were right. She looked across the room. It is what remains when the institution tries to convince you that you are small. Several people wiped tears from their faces. Evelyn continued. "The danger begins when we decide someone deserves kindness only after we learn they are important." Her gaze moved gently from person to person. The woman in a torn coat matters before you know her name. The delivery driver matters before you see what is inside the truck. The worker matters before you learn who signs the checks. And a person standing alone matters before a billionaire takes their hand. Nathan lowered his head. Evelyn smiled toward him. "He did not make me worthy that night." She looked at Rachel. "The first person who stood beside me did not make me worthy either. Then Susan. Nor the second. Then the room. They simply stopped pretending they could not see what was already there." Applause rose slowly. Not polished, not automatic. It came from people standing because they wanted to. Martha clapped with both hands above her head. Calvin whistled. Rachel cried openly. Thomas pressed his fingers to his mouth. Nathan stood near the back and watched Evelyn receive something no court could order and no contract could manufacture. Belief, respect, love. After the ceremony, the clinic filled with ordinary work. Appointments began, phones rang, coffee poured. A nurse guided an elderly adult toward an examination room. Calvin rolled a cart of supplies through the front entrance without being stopped. Martha sat at the wooden table helping another displaced tenant complete housing forms. Evelyn moved through it all without ceremony. She adjusted chairs, answered questions, carried a box of blood pressure cuffs. Nathan found her near the coat hooks. "I thought honored guests weren't supposed to work." "I don't see any honored guests. Just one." She handed him the other side of the box. "Then make yourself useful." Together they carried it down the hallway. By late afternoon, snow had begun falling harder. The clinic windows glowed amber against the blue winter dusk. Evelyn stepped outside with her canvas bag over one shoulder. Nathan followed. My car is around the corner. My bus stop is across the street. I know. You checked? I've learned to verify. She laughed. At the curb, snow had gathered over a thin patch of ice. Nathan offered his hand. This time there were no donors, no cameras, no terrified executives watching for clues about where power had moved. Only the sound of buses, tires pressing through slush, and warm light spilling from the clinic behind them. Evelyn took his hand. They crossed slowly. Halfway to the bus stop, she looked back. Through the windows, she could see Rachel speaking with a visitor, David holding the door for a delivery worker, and Thomas standing beneath the wall of restored names. The silver pin shone faintly against the old canvas bag. Evelyn tightened her patched coat around her shoulders. The room that had humiliated her was now dark. The room built from her dignity was full of light. Nathan stood beside her beneath the falling snow. And for the first time in many years, Evelyn did not feel that history was chasing her. She felt it walking with her. The lesson is simple, but it is not easy. Dignity is revealed by how we treat people before we know their title, their history, or their power. Lauren's regret came only after the room learned Evelyn's name, and that was far too late. Today, notice one person others are overlooking, a worker, a visitor, someone standing alone, and offer them the same respect you would give the most important person in the room. You do not need Nathan Cole's money to stand beside someone. You only need the courage Rachel found when she finally stepped forward. Would you have spoken up while Evelyn was still just a woman in a torn coat? Tell me honestly in the comments. And stay close, because the next story begins with another quiet stranger no one thinks is worth noticing.